It's one of the biggest mysteries in American history. What happened to Jimmy Hoffa? Hard to believe, but it's been nearly 5 decades. We're talking 50 years since the labor leader vanished.
Few stories in modern American lore have stirred as much debate as the disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa. In the summer of 1975, the influential Teamsters boss stepped into a suburban Detroit meeting.
The famed and powerful labor leader in the early 70s went missing on July 30th in 1975.
And vanished without a trace. Nearly 50 years later, investigators claim they've finally arrived at a promising dig site beneath a New Jersey bridge.
Authorities now indicating they're breaking new ground in the search under a New Jersey bridge. Maura Barrett has access.
Drawing on expert analysis of a lone playing card, the movements of a search dog named Moxie, and a long overlooked plot of ground in Milwaukee. This latest effort may shine new light on one of the most enduring puzzles in U.S. crime history. On the morning of July the 30th, 1975, the weather was hot and heavy as Jimmy Hoffa stepped out of his house in Bloomfield Township, Michigan. Wearing a navy sport coat and a clean white shirt, he looked like his usual self. His trademark slicked-back hair caught the morning sun, reflecting the confidence of a man who once held massive influence. Hoffa, the former president of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, was someone whose presence had once commanded attention nationwide. That morning, he left home with a new sense of purpose. He believed the meeting ahead could be his chance to reclaim his past power. The conversation was supposed to clear things up with people who were deeply tied to organized crime. He was headed to the Machus Red Fox, a quiet and upscale restaurant in Bloomfield Hills, a Detroit suburb. But Hoffa was never seen again after that. By the evening, his Lincoln Continental sat alone in the parking lot. The engine was off, the keys were gone, his wallet, briefcase, and personal belongings vanished with him. The scene was oddly clean. There were no signs of violence, no witnesses, and no camera footage. It was like he had just disappeared. His vanishing triggered a media storm and led to one of the largest and most well-known manhunts in U.S. history. At the time, Hoffa was already a divisive figure. He had climbed from a modest background to become one of the most influential people in the country, thanks to his leadership of the Teamsters. But with that rise came plenty of controversy. His ties to the mob, criminal convictions for bribery and fraud, and his intense push to take back control of the Union made him a threat to many. Though Hoffa had supported millions of workers, he also represented the darker side of corruption and crime. Rumors spread quickly, and theories about his fate exploded. Some said he was buried beneath the concrete at Giants Stadium in New Jersey. Others believed he ended up in an industrial shredder or sealed inside a steel drum at the bottom of the Great Lakes. Over the years, countless tips emerged, but none ever led to answers. In 1982, with no evidence and no progress, Hoffa was declared legally dead. Still, that didn't stop the questions. His disappearance went beyond the man himself. It became part of American culture. Books, articles, documentaries, and even Scorsese's 2019 film The Irishman kept his story alive. But the main question never went away. Where is Jimmy Hoffa's body? For decades, the hunt for Hoffa's remains turned into a string of failed attempts. Every new lead ended the same way. Nowhere. From farms in Michigan to dumps in New Jersey, each tip, no matter how strong, was investigated with full effort. The FBI led several missions to find answers, determined to crack one of the country's most confusing cold cases. But each time they dug, the mystery only got deeper. Some searches gained national attention. Crowds watched as the promise of uncovering a piece of missing history played out live. Helicopters hovered overhead, tracking every move. Crews on the ground dug through dirt with machines and by hand. News outlets covered every step, every pause, every moment of hope. But in the end, nothing ever came of it. No remains, no answers, just more silence. One of the most well-known searches took place in 2006, when the FBI, acting on an anonymous tip, arrived at the Hidden Dreams Horse Farm in Milford Township, Michigan. The tip claimed that Hoffa's remains had been hidden inside a barn shortly after he vanished. People across the country watched closely as heavy machinery dug into the ground and forensic teams sifted through the soil, searching for anything that could be linked to Hoffa. But once the digging was finished, the site remained quiet. No trace of human remains turned up. Hoffa was not there. It was just another dead end, another example of how hard it had become to find the truth. As time went on, the sense of urgency surrounding Hoffa's case started to fade. Still, the mystery never stopped capturing public interest. Teams focused on cold cases were formed, pulling together professionals who used advanced forensic methods in hopes of finally cracking the case. Despite their work, they kept coming back to the same place. There were still no clear answers. Witnesses who might have known the truth were fading into history. Some investigators who had once been deeply involved in the case were getting older, retiring, or passing away. Each year that went by made solving the mystery feel more unlikely. Slowly, people started moving on from the obsession that once gripped the country. Hoffa, once a figure of national attention, was turning into just another name attached to a mystery that remained unsolved. But behind the scenes, something different was happening. A small group of dedicated volunteers started quietly working on their own version of the case. These individuals had no official authority, no red tape to deal with. They simply had the same drive for answers that had once sparked the initial investigations. They weren't ready to let Hoffa's story disappear. Quietly and steadily, they began collecting information and piecing together a theory they believed could breathe new life into the search. By 2022, the mystery of Jimmy Hoffa's disappearance had become part of American folklore, filled with conspiracy theories and rumors. Interest surged again when a documentary came out with a bold new claim. It said that Hoffa's body had been buried under the Pulaski Skyway in New Jersey, a bridge that stretched over a region long tied to organized crime. The documentary included a tip from a source who had remained unnamed, reports of unusual soil readings, and the location's close ties to known criminal activity. The theory sounded possible, even tempting, and people were quickly caught up in a fresh wave of curiosity. The FBI, noticing the renewed attention, chose to take the lead seriously. They launched a new investigation focused on the area under the Pulaski Skyway. Drones scanned the site from above, while teams used ground-penetrating radar to look beneath the surface. For several weeks, the search dominated headlines. Everyone wondered, could this be the final answer? Was Hoffa finally going to be found? The search felt like something out of a crime drama. News reporters gathered near the bridge, providing constant updates while the public waited. It seemed like this might finally be the moment the mystery was solved. But as the digging progressed, the outcome was disappointing. Even with all the effort and attention, no trace of Hoffa was discovered. There were no remains, no evidence. The response from the public was a mix of shock and frustration. But the search revealed something beyond just results. It proved that, even decades later, people were still deeply invested in Hoffa's story. This wasn't just an investigation anymore. It had become a symbol of all the unanswered questions left behind. Hoffa himself was gone, but the mystery surrounding him still wasn't finished. When Martin Scorsese released The Irishman in 2019, it reignited public curiosity around the mystery of Jimmy Hoffa's disappearance, a case that had slowly faded from public attention. The film was based on Frank Sheeran's controversial account, which claimed that he had killed Hoffa in a house near Detroit, where the body was allegedly cremated. For many viewers, this explanation felt like a believable conclusion to the long-running mystery. However, not everyone was persuaded. Sheeran's reliability was already under scrutiny, and experts were quick to highlight several issues in his story. Investigators did inspect the house Sheeran mentioned, but they didn't find anything that definitively connected Hoffa to the location. Luminol testing revealed traces of blood, but there was no way to determine if it came from Hoffa, adding more doubt to an already unclear case. Despite the questions, the Irishman left a lasting impression. It breathed new life into the Hoffa case and drew the attention of younger audiences. This wave of renewed interest even led the FBI to quietly take another look at the investigation. Around the same time, a private organization called the Case Breakers, a team made up of former law enforcement, intelligence officers, and forensic professionals, started investigating a lead that had been overlooked for years. The lead came from a now-deceased police officer in Wisconsin who had left behind a cryptic message. What he left behind was unexpected: a playing card. Specifically, it was the Ace of Spades, with a handwritten note that read, "Milwaukee, 3rd base, Old Stadium, 1995. The card was discovered among the late officer's belongings after his death in 2020. His family had no idea what it meant and handed it over to the Case Breakers. At first glance, it seemed like another vague clue with no direct connection to Hoffa. But the more the team investigated, the more they began to think the card might carry real significance. The words "third base" appeared to reference a location at the former Milwaukee County Stadium, which had been demolished in 2001. Even though the stadium was gone, satellite photos from the late 90s showed something odd. Near the spot where third base once stood, the ground appeared disturbed. That area didn't look natural, as if someone had dug there and quickly tried to hide it. This was enough for the team to begin a full investigation. What the Case Breakers discovered next could be a major development. The disturbed soil beneath where third base used to be suggested that something, or someone, might have been buried there. Could this be where Hoffa was hidden all along? The team was determined to get clarity. As more details emerged, the situation started to take shape. What first looked like a meaningless clue was beginning to seem like a potential key to the whole mystery. The investigation was now active again, and Jimmy Hoffa's story was once more in the spotlight. The Case Breakers knew time wasn't on their side. If the tip was accurate, the answer might be lying in a place no one had expected. Their attention turned to a quiet piece of land next to American Family Field, the stadium currently used by the Milwaukee Brewers. To most, it just looked like a standard parking area with a small baseball field. But beneath it, something else might be hidden. That Little League diamond, built in 2002, sat right on top of the old Milwaukee County Stadium's grounds. The exact spot where third base had once been was now filled with the sounds of kids playing and bats hitting balls. But beneath the cheerful scene might lie a chapter of buried history. The anonymous tip had been very specific. Jimmy Hoffa could be buried somewhere near that ball field, close to where third base once stood. The investigators were now trying to find out whether this theory had any truth to it. Using modern technology, the team used ground-penetrating radar, GPR, to scan the area for any unusual signs. At first, the scans didn't show anything unusual, just normal layers of soil across the site. The readings lined up with what they expected for that location. But as the radar passed over the third base area, something unexpected showed up. It was a small but clear anomaly. A dense and compacted layer of clay appeared beneath the surface, with sharp, well-defined edges. This radar reading was highly unusual and didn't match the natural soil pattern in that part of the field. It was clear the ground had been altered. The team had long known that this part of the lot hadn't been touched in decades. So the question became, why was there such a strong difference in the soil makeup? The unusual reading matched exactly with the area mentioned in the tip, the former location of third base. Even though the disrupted soil stood out, radar alone couldn't prove anything for certain. It only showed shapes and density changes. It was compelling, but not conclusive. The team knew that their next step had to be physical. The radar had given them a clue, but it was just one piece of a much bigger picture. Now, they had to follow it up with action and see what the ground was really hiding. As the team stood on the ballpark grounds, they were already starting to piece things together. The compacted clay they had found wasn't just a strange discovery. It was the kind of soil that might be used to cover something underneath. After reviewing historical records, the team learned that the area where the radar had picked up an anomaly had never been dug into. There were no records of any major work being done in that specific part of the property that could explain the clear difference in soil composition. Yet the radar had picked up something unusual, an underground layer of tightly packed clay, placed with deliberate care. The more the team considered it, the more it made sense. That clay had most likely been put there on purpose. The way it was packed didn't happen naturally. It wasn't the kind of soil treatment used for regular construction projects. When clay is packed that tightly, it can actually slow down decomposition. It's the kind of material used in landfills or by people trying to hide human remains. Its location beneath the baseball field didn't feel like a coincidence, but just finding the clay wasn't enough. It strongly suggested something, but it wasn't solid proof. The investigators knew they needed to be absolutely sure. After all, this was a public ballpark, not some remote or abandoned location. A mistake here could be costly. They needed a more reliable method. Wanting to be as accurate as possible, the team consulted with experts and brought in what they hoped would give them a clear answer. Moxie, a cadaver dog trained to detect human remains. Moxie wasn't just any dog. She was a top-tier cadaver dog with over 200 confirmed finds. She had been trained to pick up the scent of human remains even in the most difficult settings. Law enforcement across the country had relied on her skills. Her handler, a retired police officer with decades of experience, had worked many tough cases. Still, this one felt different. He knew that if anything was buried there, Moxie's nose would find it, something radar and eyesight alone couldn't manage. The scent of decomposition lingers, especially when remains haven't been properly buried. When Moxie arrived at the site near Milwaukee's American Family Field, she didn't waste any time. She immediately focused on a specific area, her nose picking up something no person could sense. As her handler guided her toward the target spot, she stopped, took a breath, and suddenly sat down. She wagged her tail, the clear sign she had found something of importance. Then she turned and stared at one particular patch of ground. But she didn't stop there. Moxie didn't just give one alert and move on. She kept going back to that exact same spot. She did it 4 separate times, each time confirming her interest in the same location. Her actions said a lot. This wasn't random. In her calm, focused way, she had marked the area with what her handler called a high-confidence alert. For the team, this was the breakthrough they had hoped for. A strong sign that human remains might be buried under the surface, just as the original tip had said. It wasn't a guarantee, of course. The scent could have come from something else, or it could be a rare false alarm. But with both the radar anomaly and Moxie's response, they couldn't dismiss what they had found. With Moxie confirming the site, the team jumped into action. They recorded the coordinates, took photos, and filed all the needed paperwork with local officials. The next move was to begin the legal steps to request a formal excavation. It wouldn't be quick. These things never are. But after years of false leads and dead ends, rushing wasn't an option. They had to be careful. The dig was done slowly and with great care. Precision mattered. Every layer of soil was sifted through, and cameras above captured the entire process. Forensic experts were ready, standing by to examine anything recovered. The pressure was intense. If this turned out to be Hoffa's body, it would be the case-solving clue investigators had searched for over 40 years. 2 feet down, the soil suddenly changed. The compacted clay layer gave way, and underneath, something appeared. Fragments that didn't naturally belong in the earth. These weren't made of metal or plastic. They were organic and clearly human. The discovery shook the team. After all these years, they had finally found the evidence they had been looking for. The team began by performing an initial examination at the site. The remains were identified as human, an adult male. That alone was enough to make everyone uneasy, but it was far from the end. Samples were quickly sent out for a more detailed analysis, as the team suspected they might be dealing with more than just a body. This could be the missing piece in one of America's most well-known disappearance cases. A few days later, the lab results came back. DNA testing confirmed their suspicion. The genetic profile matched members of Jimmy Hoffa's family. This wasn't just anyone. These were Hoffa's remains. But what followed was even more unsettling than anyone expected. Forensic tests showed that the body hadn't been buried in 1975, the year Hoffa went missing. Instead, the burial was dated to around 1995, 20 years after he disappeared. That discovery changed everything. If Hoffa's body had been buried in 1995, someone had clearly moved it. That opened up a disturbing set of questions. Who moved it? What was the reason? And why choose such a hidden spot underneath a stadium? The investigation didn't stop with finding Hoffa. As the dig continued, the team discovered another partial set of remains. These bones were smaller and didn't seem to match Hoffa's. They might have belonged to another victim, or perhaps someone who was somehow involved in Hoffa's case. The puzzle grew more complex. The team released an official statement, and it was grim. This was serious. Not only had the original body been relocated, but it had also been hidden and altered in some way. And with a second body found, it became clear there was a lot more to this case than anyone first believed. They weren't just looking for Hoffa anymore. They had stumbled onto what looked like a second crime scene, surrounded by secrets, lies, and betrayal. The entire area was locked down, and federal agents, including the FBI, stepped in to lead the case. Their lack of comment said more than words could. Up to this point, no public statements have been made. If this really is the location where Jimmy Hoffa was buried, what does that say about the powers that kept it hidden all these years? Let us know what you think in the comments. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.